Harvey, it's great to have you. Thanks for taking the time to talk about the Harvard Overseers.
Oh, my problem child, Harvard University.
Well, I appreciate you taking time, and we're both obviously running as write-in candidates for the Board of Overseers this year around. It seems like an important year to do it and see if we can kind of affect some change. You've done this twice before, and I'd be curious to kind of what you've learned from the last two times you've tried to do this, and kind of what lessons you carry forward into this one.
Well, what I have learned is that they try very hard to not let anybody in on their little game. I told you what happened between my first and second runs. Because I got on the ballot the first time and would have won, except that this little trick by the Alumni Association of not sending out my message to the whole alumni body. If this were today, I probably could have figured out a way of getting it out to the whole alumni body, but back then I couldn't. They obviously do not want any out. Even though I'm an alum, they consider me an outsider and a gigantic pain in the ass to them, especially since fire is also a pain for them.
Yes.
So I think this is very important. Even if we don't win, I think it sends a message.
I agree, although I'd like to win. I mean, I'm doing this because I believe that, that the university needs new voices on the inside. Harvard is set up, I think intentionally, I mean, you have a lot of experience with this, but it's intentionally set up to be somewhat insular and be protected in a lot of ways from the outside world. I actually think that's a good thing most of the time, right? But in this case, it feels like, the corporation and the overseers really need help thinking through how to move the university forward in this moment, right? Since 10/7, the turmoil around gay, et cetera. It just seems like a lot of things you've been pushing on for a long time around speech on campus have really come to a head. And this is the moment for outsiders to try to, very legitimately get on the inside and help kind of with new ideas and new thinking. And, my take is that, and I'm curious if you agree, is that the university, I think, does get it. From my conversations with administrators, there's this kind of interesting tension between people saying, look, we do need to reform and change, but also to some degree being hesitant, thinking a lot about like whether that change comes from without or within and not wanting to feel forced into things. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's other dynamics at play?
Well, I think that part of the problem is the same as it is in universities all over the country. It is very hard to effectuate real change.
Yeah.
Even from the top, assuming the top being the corporation were willing to see change. It is very hard to deal with the bureaucracy and change the bureaucracy. It's no different than, Congress trying to change the U.S. Postal Service. For decades, I have advocated massive changes to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which I consider a very dangerous agency as currently constituted. FBI directors come and FBI directors go, and the culture of the FBI still thinks that J. Edgar Hoover is running the place. So institutional change is very difficult. And my view is that what really is necessary here is firing 90 to 95% of the administrators.
Yes.
They're unnecessary. All they do is think up mischief like speech codes and kangaroo courts to enforce the codes, and they harass faculty members. So changing the culture would be the culture would be vastly better if we could get rid of a lot of the administrators. The president, in theory, could do this, but the presidents, in fact, do not. The last president who really tried to effectuate change was Larry Summers, and they managed to get rid of him by hoking up a claim that he was insulting to women scientists. I sort of saw that coming. Um,
So can I ask you? I mean, I think that I think there's some. I get the perspective, right? And I do think that there's good sense in saying that if you have too much organizational bloat in anywhere, you end up with some unintended consequences for sure. And like thinking about, and it's very hard to roll back. I mean, I've seen that in the corporate world before at scale, right? When things grow too big, you do end up with these types of challenges. I also think when I think of the hierarchy of problems the university has to address, um, to me, I would argue this is problem like 7, not 1, right? Like if you think about, like, for me, problem 1 is just thinking about, does Harvard have clear rules around speech, and are they being consistently enforced? And is Harvard being true to its core academic mission above all else? Like those are the things I would start with. But I do think there is a lot of appetite potentially for change. I think that in some ways, 10-7 shined a real light on a bunch of the issues that have been there for a while in various ways. And in some ways, sometimes your blessings are curses and your curses are blessings. There's an argument that purely from a Harvard perspective, the extremeness of this fall will create that light where people say, really, we do need change, right, on those kind of core things. I'm kind of curious when you think about, like, the next 2 to 3 years, where I think even if you and I might agree intellectually that there's too many administrators and like that, I think you're right. It's going to be very hard to change that anytime soon. Like, if you could wave a magic wand and change 1 or 2 things in the next year, practically, what would they be?
well, if I could wave a magic wand, I would say the if you want 2 suggestions, one of them
Yeah.
would be to reduce the bureaucracy, vastly reduce the bureaucracy,
Yeah.
because it would eliminate a lot of the resistance to change.
Yeah.
The reason that we can't get real reform of the post office is because of the huge bureaucracy. Same with the FBI. So getting rid of the bureaucracy automatically makes it possible for people like us to to effectuate change, to influence the effectuation of change.
I agree, but just to push you, Harvey, because I'm curious. Like, I mean, to me, the immediate issues around, like, Harvard, Gay had a speech, in front of Congress about believing in free speech. But I think you and I both agree that from an academic perspective, there is not a free speech culture at Harvard. Quite the opposite, right? That gap needs to be closed, right? Either there needs to be a speech code and it needs to be equally enforced everywhere and consistent. Not my preference, but it's at least a logical place to be, right? Or there needs to be a reaffirmation, right, of a true free speech culture. Do you believe that without changing administrative bloat, or that's just impossible? Because it seems very doable to me from the top to say we are a free speech culture, right? We're going to stop doing X, Y, and Z, right? We're going to get rid of, we're going to no longer, rescind offers because students posted memes, right? We're going to, we're going to get rid of anything that's kind of blocking in-class conversations, things like that. Do you think that's just not possible without administrative change, or is that more an issue on the side of the professors and kind of coming from the top?
Well, I think that I really think that change at Harvard has begins and ends at the corporation
Yeah.
level, and the overseers, of course, have substantial influence.
Yeah.
I could never get a meeting with the board, but if I was on with the corporation, but if I was on the overseers, I think I could get. We
Yeah.
could get. So that is a very important effort that we're making. I'm not sure that we'll make it this time. It would be good if we have more time than just this month. But I think eventually we should try to. We should also enlist a couple of others. I know that the judge wants to run.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very, very good. We should help him set up his portal and so forth.
Yeah.
And I can't remember a time when there were 3 petition candidates seeking a place on the ballot. So that means that
Yeah, go ahead.
that means that the satisfaction level has reached a point where things are happening.
Yeah. Well, I feel actually it will be far more than 3. My understanding, in terms of people who are trying to get on the ballot right now, I think there's a lot of broad dissatisfaction among the alumni. And it is interesting to your point about the powers of the overseers. I actually think this is a major mistake by the organization, by Harvard overall, which is if you ask most people internally at Harvard, what they'll tell you, and the general stories of the overseers are not a very powerful group, right? They do some academic review, but they're basically a rubber stamp organization. I think that's a real mistake, right? I think that's not actually the charter. The charter is they have real powers. They have to approve new presidents and new corporation members, and there is real seriousness to that. In a lot of very serious organizations, you say the board's real job is succession planning. Right? That's what a board really does, right? Is governance and succession planning. And I do think that kind of the cultural disempowerment of the overseers is part of what has made Harvard weak. Because again, if you think about the situation with Gay, the corporation probably should never have proposed her, right? But the overseers do bear some responsibilities for accepting that, right? In terms of where they're. And so I do think that it becoming more serious again would be good. And then there's the problem of why are there so many petitioners this year? What's going on? I think the problem is that, as I think you alluded to, HAA really picks the slate, and HAA represents a tiny percentage of the alumni base, right? And so most alumni say, okay, it's fine, it's not that big a deal, HAA is fine. And you kind of get your overseers, and it's a pretty limited process. Only about 10% of alums vote in any form in overseers elections. But again, the reason you have so many petitioners this year, and the reason why I think it is you're going to see a lot of people saying we need differences. There's so many alums that just are feeling not represented who do care about Harvard, right? They want to see it successful as an institution. And care about it.
What happened was that the televised committee hearing suddenly woke people up.
Yeah.
What was interesting about her testimony was she had the core of a right answer. It would obviously have been fed to her by the lawyers who prepared her for her testimony. I happen to think that universities should not have political positions, period.
I agree completely. And I think Pinker put this very nicely. It's what did he say? He said the universities should be forums, not protagonists.
Exactly. That prevents partisan attacks.
Yep.
Among other things. But she didn't understand it, and she really didn't believe it, because as a dean of the faculty, she was the educator of the faculty on the diversity. Here's a poster that one of her programs. And you read this, and it's outrageous. If I was a faculty member and I got this, I would burn it in the public square, in front of the media. And equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging training for faculty members. What are they, infants? It is totally idiotic. This was sent to me, by the way, by a tenured faculty member who is furious when it landed on his desk.
Yes.
A fellow who is who won every prize in his field with the exception of the Nobel, and was actually considered for the Nobel, and he has to get a leaflet from Claudine Gay, inviting him to a training session. It's idiotic. And it's insulting, and it's contrary to the interests of a liberal arts institution.
Yeah. Well, I think that in the end of the day, for me, it just comes down to the fact that Harvard, again, it's a great institution. It's an important institution. It's probably the premier brand for education globally and for American education, among many other things.
In the world, probably.
In the world. And I think that matters, the example that's set there. That's, by the way, why it's so charged, right? Because people do understand that it's supposed to be non-political, but it is such a political prize, right? And so the reality is of the last many years, it seems as though it's drifted away from a core academic mission, which is we're here to educate, right? We're here to, create new knowledge in the world, which is how you end up with a world where and because it drifted from that mission, you're allowing bullhorns, around the freshman dorms, around exams, protests. You're disrupting the academic process for other things. That just seems like a non-starter to me. And then within that, you have a culture that unfortunately evolved in a direction which, again, I found Gay's testimony mostly insulting, because I, like you, actually do believe in free speech, but I don't believe you get to invoke it when it politically suits you. I think that's something you have to live, right, and be consistent about. And so the idea that you have a culture that is clearly not a free speech culture today, yet you invoke free speech when it's convenient, right? That unequal application obviously has to stop. And I think as you do, that the Board of Overseers does have a role to play in this, and an important one. It's going to be more important now that there'll be a new presidential search
Well,
coming up.
the reason it's going to be more important now is because the corporation has been disgraced in the eyes of the public.
Yes.
And so the overseers should be more powerful as a result of this.
Well, and I think again, an informed corporation, I think, would realize that they want a strong set of overseers to validate what they're doing. If when you have a credibility problem, right, or there's been an issue, the best thing you can have is a serious outside force agreeing with your work, right, and working with you. Like, you want strong leaders. You don't want people you can just roll over, right? And so I think there's this fine line of you don't want to be antagonistic to the corporation. Like, I think you want to support them in their work, and it is important work. But I do think that in some ways, if you're going to co-sign their checks, whether it's for a president, a new corporation member, things like that, taking that responsibility of co-signing seriously, right, and actually as the primary job, I think is something that needs to be taken into account. And candidly, I think you want a broad, diverse set of people doing that, right? You don't want all your buddies co-signing your checks, because that co-signing means a lot less, right? So I agree. I mean, I think it's been an interesting evolution. I think, I started thinking about this a little over a month ago, about a month ago. And I think, we've been talking about it for a while. It does seem like even since you and I have been talking, you've said a few times, like, I think, we'll see if we win or not. I think it's pretty critical to try to win this time, because it will be this set of overseers that helps co-sign that check for the next president of Harvard. And it does seem like the university has a serious decision to make about the direction it's going to head, and how it thinks about its academic credibility and things like that. These are things I don't want to sacrifice.
Let me tell you something interesting. I developed a relationship with Larry Bacow, and I met with him for twice for 1 hour each time on behalf of FIRE, and presented him with a memo of the deficiencies in Harvard's Harvard's performance with regard to free speech and academic freedom. And he agreed with everything I said, everything. He was unable to effectuate changes because the culture had been so deeply embedded that even the president was unable to do it, which is why I think that the overseers have to step in. I think, of course, the corporation has to step in, but they have life tenure, as one federal judge said when I invited him, a federal district judge who was a friend of mine, gave a lecture in the semester that I taught at Harvard Law School. I taught one semester and was offered a tenure track position that I turned down because I said I couldn't stand the administrators. The dean of the law school said it was the first time anybody had ever turned down a tenure track position offer at Harvard Law School. I said, well, I've given you a good reason. And I went back to my law firm. But the federal judge, Joe Toro, I invited him, and he was asked a pretty stupid question. During the Q&A, they said, what is it that a federal district judge does? Could you imagine this question from a law student? And Toro said, without even missing a beat, he said, life tenure, no heavy lifting. Next question. And these administrators have effectively life tenure and no heavy lifting. And it's because they have no heavy lifting that they think up these schemes. So there's a synergy here between, getting rid of the administrators, because it changes the culture when you get rid of the administrators. Plus, you save an awful lot of money, and tuition can be reduced considerably in that situation. Now that affirmative action has been bounced by the Supreme Court, which an opinion, by the way, I agree with it. I'm a political liberal, and I agree that affirmative action has been a disaster. So now they're thinking up ways of getting around it, establishing criteria for admission that doesn't sound like it's race-based, but will effectively get more black kids in. instead of working to try to improve, because Harvard can do this, influence the improvement of uh, public elementary and secondary education so that affirmative action is unnecessary. The reason it's necessary is there are no biological reasons or that these kids can't learn. It's they go to lousy public schools. Um, Instead of working on that problem, they're trying to get around what the
Yeah.
Supreme Court has done. So everything that they do is subject to criticism by rational people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complicated set of issues, and I don't think it's fair to say that Harvard needs to solve all the world's problems. Like to me, I think actually when you do that, you end up peanut buttering to the point that you have no mission anymore, right? And for me,
Right.
what
But
I think the true north is just Harvard is an academic institution. Its job is to train, right, the best and brightest and produce the best academic work. Full stop. That's easy, right? And I
but
think yeah,
remember that improving public education, to the extent you have influence over that, will produce a larger
I get
body of people who might be admitted.
I understand and I agree with that. Like I'm highly in favor of early childhood education and a lot of these types of efforts. The question is who takes ultimate responsibility for them. And I don't think that Harvard, I think in some ways there's an irony, right? Which is that Harvard has ended up in this very strange position. Actually, in some ways they're a victim of their own success, which is it's such a rich institution and the brand is so valuable, right? It's so meaningful in a lot of ways that they've been put in this awkward position where a lot of people want to use it as a political force, right? They want to go beyond the educational mission of the school, which is, the core thing that I believe the school needs to focus on into many other avenues. But then at the same time, they don't want any feedback. So they're willing to push out politically into the world, but then, cry foul when there's political pushback against what they're doing or outside opinions coming in. And I think that's a very tenuous position for Harvard as a brand. I think it's a way to destroy a lot of equity, a lot of what makes Harvard a valuable thing, right? Which is why I go back to this kind of simple thing, which is I don't disagree with a lot of the points you're making. I actually do, but I do think in some ways maybe I'm just a little less ambitious than you are, right? Which is, to me, the first steps end up being let's recenter on the academic mission. I think the president, I think the corporation can do that. I think the overseers have responsibility for making sure that happens, right, and advocating for that. I think it is about setting and making clear rules and consistently enforcing those and creating more academic freedom. Seems like a core set of things to go after. Administrative reduction. How do we increase, the access to good education that feeds Harvard? These are all wonderful missions for the country and things we should be on. But it's not clear to me that those should be Harvard's missions, right? Versus kind of being core to their
Well,
academic
reducing the administration is a Harvard issue. First,
Yeah,
it's
it
a
is.
it's a cultural issue, it's an educational issue, and it's a financial issue.
I agree. I just it's fun to have a little bit of agreeing debate with you. I think it's just a honest question about the order in which you prioritize it. Because I think, to your point, I think it'll be insanely difficult to focus on that anytime soon, right? Whereas I do think there are other more specific problems that have been clear since in this fall of weaknesses that need to be addressed that can be addressed. I think, as you kind of move forward. Long term, should you reduce the administrative burden? Probably. Right? Most organizations in history get very bloated. It's not just Harvard. It's just the nature, every single company in the world has had this problem, right? Some are strong enough to survive it and do the cuts they need to do and recenter themselves. Others are not, right? And you need a strong leader and a strong set of leaders to do that. But to me, the thing I would love to see in the next president, right, and addressed immediately, again, goes back to this whole refocus on the academic mission, not the political one, right? Which I think should be doable, right? And kind of making sure the next person understands either is a true free speech person, right, and is going to drive towards that and get air cover from
So the
from
academic mission certainly would include getting rid of anything that smacks of training.
yeah. I mean, I think again, education can be education. I don't think it's a problem for people to share viewpoints or offer different viewpoints on the world and how things should work, but I guess there's a fine line between what's education and what's training, or what's, if that makes sense. But yeah,
Well, it may be a fine line, but I know it when I see it.
I hear you. And that's, again, I think part of the beauty of the overseers is you're studying a group of people whose judgment you do need to trust, right? To kind of hold the line and, be able to be, as we said, co-signers on a lot of these important decisions coming up, including the new president. So anyway, listen, I don't want to take too much time, both because I don't want to take your time, which I know is valuable, and I know that people will only have a finite appetite for listening to the two of us talk. But is there anything else in closing that you wanted to mention or say?
I want Darcelis and Lily, could you come here? Hold on, I'm just asking my assistants to come in.
Sure.
You want to come back here? You can meet my two assistants.
I would love that.
They're helping me on my campaign, such as it is.
Excellent.
So,
Nice to meet you.
Darcelis
Hey, guys.
and Lily.
Nice to meet you, Darcelis and Lily. How's it going?
Good.
Excellent.
So, we're in the process. Tomorrow we will have to you this draft piece for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.